Hi, fifth grade team. Today I want to talk through some of the important parts of our graphing on a coordinate plane unit. So first thing to really make sure you understand is kids have never graphed on a coordinate plane before, so they come with zero knowledge about this. The only thing they may have done, which unfortunately tends to cause some misconceptions for our kids, is when they colored pictures where there was a grid and it showed like a letter going one way and a number going the other way, and it said color the box A for blue, and they would find A and they would go to the fourth box and color it blue. So that causes misconceptions for our kids, because when you are working with coordinate grids, you're not talking about the boxes, you're talking about where lines intersect to meet at a point. So if you see a kiddo struggling with that particular concept, then you'll have to have that conversation, and you should anyways, because we explicitly teach things that we've never seen before. So we make sure they understand all the details, and I've got a picture of what I'm talking about in your scope and sequence if you need a better idea, or something to even show a student to help them understand the difference in what they may have done previously and what they'll be learning in fifth grade. So first of all, there are some important, very, very important vocabulary terms in our unit. We have to know what the origin is, and that's the point 0, 0, and that's where the x-axis and the y-axis intersect. Now you'll notice that I have drawn arrows on the ends of my number lines, even to past 0, 0 into the negatives. Why? Because those numbers exist. Do we graph in those? We don't. We only graph in quadrant 1 in fifth grade because we're introducing brand new. Now in sixth grade, they'll graph in quadrant 1, 2, 3, and 4. But for fifth grade purposes, we only worry about quadrant 1. So we need to know that the horizontal axis is the x-axis and the vertical axis is the y-axis. And that when we graph a point, we graph where the two numbers, the two coordinates, intersect at one point. So when we are numbering a coordinate grid, we number the lines, not the spaces, because there are numbers between 0 and 1 that we may have to represent. So in fifth grade, because we work with all positive rational numbers, that means that we will also be working with fractions, decimals, and whole numbers when we're graphing on a coordinate grid. So our coordinates, or our ordered pairs, are always set up as x, y, with a comma between them. So we're going to graph 6, 5. And we always talk about that the x is our horizontal movement and the y is our vertical movement. Now, we are going to remember that we start with x and go horizontally to the 6, and then we go vertically up to 5, the y, and where those two lines intersect is our point 6, 5. So that's what kids need to know when they're very first learning how to graph something. They graph the x, go across on the x, and then they go up to the y. And there are lots of different ways to help kids remember that we do x before we do y. Lots of great sayings. If you don't know any of those, talk to somebody who was at the C&P, and they can give you lots of suggestions for that. The thing that we want to remember is horizontal and then vertical. We go across on the x, and then we go up on the y, or vertically on the y. We don't want to say we always go up, because next year they will not always go up, or they could also go down. So we want to make sure we're using horizontal and vertical. I always had my kids label the x is our horizontal movement, the y is our vertical movement. And I did that because I needed to repeat that process every time to help them remember how to graph. So in addition to graphing where the grid is numbered sequentially by ones, we also introduce in fifth grade that not every graph is going to be numbered by ones. In this case, my lines represent 1/2, Now notice I didn't label every single one because that would get real sloppy and hard to read. And we expect a 5th grader to know that halfway between 0 and 1 is 1/2. Halfway between 1 and 2 is 1 1/2. It will not always be labeled for them. They will need to be able to label that. Now, they also need to be able to do that as a fraction or a decimal. So just like we've talked all year, I need students to know that 1/2 is equal to 5/10. So it can be a decimal or a fraction. So if I'm trying to graph the point 3 and 5/10, comma, 2 and 5/10, I would go horizontally to 3 and 5/10, or 3 1/2, and then I would go vertically to 2 and 5/10, or 2 1/2, and I would label my point. I would also want them to know that that's the same as 3 and 1/2, 2 and 1/2. So they've got to know it both ways. Now here's something that tends to throw kids off. Let's say I ask a student to graph 4, 0. Here's why I always have them label this: horizontal movement, vertical movement. Horizontal movement is to the 4. What's my vertical movement? 0, nothing. My point, 4, 0, is on the x-axis. Just like if I did 0, 4, my 0, I'm going 0. There's 0 movement on my horizontal axis. My vertical movement is 4. So this is the point 0, 4. This always throws kids off. So we need to make sure we're teaching. This is horizontal movement, vertical movement. There is no horizontal movement in this, only vertical movement. In this one, there is only horizontal movement, and I'm going 0 places vertically, so it's on the x-axis. Let's look at another one. So we've also seen graphs that look like this, and kids would need to know, what does each one of those lines represent? If this is 0 and this is 1, there's 1, 2, 3, 4 hops from 0 to 1. So these represent 1/4, 1/2 or 2/4, 3/4, 1 whole, 1 1/4, 1 2/4 or 1 1/2, 1 3/4, 2 wholes. Keep going. So you will need to practice that with them because that's probably going to be a little uncomfortable for them. So they have to relate that back to equal parts. Breaking a whole into 4 equal parts means each one is 1/4 of the whole. So that will take some practice, and there's a great activity called Graphing Texas that's in the shared drive and in the Google Drive that uses this type of grid. So this could look like, what if I asked them to graph 1 3/4? So for my horizontal movement, the x-coordinate, I'm going to the 1. For my vertical movement, I'm going to 3/4. So I would talk to them about, is that going to be below or above the 1? It's going to be below because it's less than 1 whole. It's somewhere between 0 and 1. It's 1/4, 2/4, 3/4 gives me this point, 1 3/4. So far, so good? So we want to make sure we're practicing all of those different types with kids. Then we also could see graphs that are numbered differently on the x-axis and the y-axis, because with this unit we also teach scatter plots. So we don't always have to have the x-axis and the y-axis numbered the exact same way. They may have different scales, and that is okay. So if you're not sure about scatter plots, they use a coordinate grid to compare 2 types of data. So let's say we were trying to decide if 2 things were related. We would use a scatter plot to decide, is there any correlation between the 2 points? So they're looking for a correlation. Consider this. Do you think there's a relationship between the temperature outside and the amount of ice cream cones someone may sell? The hotter that it is, you will probably sell more ice cream. The colder that it is, probably not as much. Not always the case, but sometimes, and that's what a scatter plot looks for. Is there a correlation? You could also say, is there a correlation as the temperature drops? Does hot cocoa sales drop or increase? So a scatter plot graphs 2 points to look for a relationship between the two pieces of data. You can also look at number of hours studied related to grades on a test. So lots of different things that you can look at. I shared a great activity that I did with my students where they measured 4 different things, and then they picked what did they want to check to see the correlation. So they measured their height, they measured the length of their hand, so from here, from their palm to the tip of their longest finger. They measured how far they could jump, so standing flat-footed, they measured how far they could jump, and then their shoe size. And they asked a lot of great questions. Is my shoe size related to how far I can jump? You graph that on a scatter plot. You would have shoe size here, you would have distance jumped here, and look to see, is there a relationship? So what we did is we gathered all that data for our whole class, and then we chose what do we want to graph today. So we gathered all the data on one day, and then each day we chose 2 different things that we wanted to compare. Is my height related to my shoe size? Is my hand size related to how far I can jump? Is my shoe size related to my hand size? So each day they got to use their own class data and create a different scatter plot each time. Now we'll review scatter plots again when we get to our data analysis unit, but we introduce it with coordinate grids because it is graphing on a coordinate plane. So those are the main topics of graphing on a coordinate plane. A lot of vocabulary, and then practicing over and over again that horizontal movement for the x-coordinate, vertical movement for the y-coordinate. Remember, whole numbers, decimals, and fractions, and we work with scatter plots as well as with regular coordinate grids. Some other important things that students struggle with is the vocabulary of finding points that are below a given line. So let me go back to one of my other grids. So let's say we had this grid and there was a line here, and there will be given 4 points and asked which point is above line, we'll call it line X. We won't call it X because that's the x-axis. We'll call it line Z. So they would graph the 4 points, and then one of them would be above the line Z or below line Z, or if it was a vertical line, they wouldn't both be on the same graph, but let's say this was line M. They might be asked west of line M or east of line M. They could be asked to the left of line M or to the right of line M. So we want to talk about north, south, east, west. They will see compass rose questions on this in this unit where they're asked to explain the movement from one point to another point. For example, if I had, we'll say 3, 2, they would have to explain the movement. I'm going to do an easier one than 1 3/4 for our purpose. The movement from this point to this point. So I might say that I would go 1, 2 to the east or to the right, and then 1 north or up. So those are things they have to do. One other TEK in this unit talks about students have to be able to describe how to graph a point. So that always starts at the origin. So my directions, if I was trying to explain to somebody how to graph the point 1, 1, is I'm going to do that on a different one because It's not usually done on one that has fractions. So let's say I was asked to give directions for how to graph the point 6, 5. I always start at the origin. I would move 6 places horizontally along the x-axis, and then I would move vertically 5 places along the y-axis. So we would make sure that that is understood how to explain that. They also need to know parallel, things that are parallel to the y-axis or parallel to the x-axis. So make sure you're throwing that good vocabulary in there and keep that going throughout this whole unit. Be sure you take a look at the STAR released questions for this unit so you can see the different ways this is tested. A lot of times we will be given a table and asked which graph matches all the points on the table, or the other way around where we're given a graph and asked for a table that has all of the points listed on the XY table. So lots of different ways to work through this unit. Mission Math has a great introductory battleship game for this, so check that out too. And then if you have any questions, let us know.